This is the mummified head of the vampire of Dusseldorf himself.
July the 2nd, 1931. In a cold German prison, Peter Curtin, the vampire of Dusseldorf, stood moments away from execution. As the executioner prepared the blade, Curtin made one last, horrifying statement, a statement that shocked everyone and the whole nation at large. Here are the 6 most chilling last words from famous serial killers.
One of the more bizarre chapters in recent American criminal history has come to an end. The end for Ted Bundy, a 42-year-old killer who left a trail of at least 20 murders from one end of the country to the other.
January 24th, 1989, Florida State Prison. Ted Bundy sits in a small holding cell knowing he has only hours left to live. America's most notorious serial killer, the man who once charmed police, judges, and even his own defense team, now faces the end he tried to escape for years. But in true Bundy fashion, his final moments are not what anyone expected. Bundy's reign of terror had spanned from the Pacific Northwest to Florida, leaving a trail of at least 30 confirmed victims, mostly women with long, dark hair parted in the middle. His crimes were calculated, brutal, and often involved revisiting his victims' remains. He manipulated those around him with his intelligence and charm, evading capture for years through clever ruses and 2 daring escapes from custody. But his luck finally ran out after his murderous rampage in Florida, including the infamous Chi Omega sorority house attacks and the abduction of Kimberly Leach. As the clock ticked down to his execution, Bundy finally began to confess to his crimes in detail. He described his need to totally possess his victims, both in life and death. He admitted to returning to crime scenes to engage in necrophilia and keeping trophies from his victims. Bundy claimed to have murdered more than 30 people, but investigators believe the true number could be much higher, possibly in the triple digits. In his final days, Bundy tried to manipulate the system one last time. He offered investigators information about other murders in exchange for a stay of execution. But this time, authorities didn't take the bait. The families of his victims refused to ask for clemency, determined that justice finally be served. The night before his execution, Bundy granted a videotaped interview to psychologist James Dobson, where he blamed poor for his crimes. Many saw this as one last attempt to shift blame and avoid taking responsibility for his actions. Throughout his life, Bundy was a master of deflection, blaming everyone and everything except himself for his monstrous deeds. As dawn approached on January 24th, Bundy's options ran out. He rejected his last meal and spent his final hours making 2 phone calls to his mother, apologizing for the grief he had caused. His last words, directed at his attorney Jim Coleman and Methodist minister Fred Lawrence, were simple.
Jim and Fred, I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends.
No dramatic confession, no remorse, just one final attempt to maintain control, even in death. At 7:16 a.m., Bundy was executed in the Florida State Prison electric chair. Outside, hundreds of people gathered to celebrate, singing, dancing, and setting off fireworks as news of his death spread. The white hearse carrying his body was met with cheers as it left the prison grounds. Bundy's ashes were later scattered in an undisclosed location in Washington state, far from the places where he committed his horrific crimes. Bundy's execution marked the end of one of America's most terrifying crime sprees, but his legacy would continue to haunt the nation. His case changed how law enforcement approached serial killers, leading to better communication between agencies and the development of modern criminal profiling techniques. Bundy's ability to blend in, manipulate those around him, and change his appearance at will forced investigators to rethink how they tracked violent offenders. Even in death, Bundy continued to exert a strange fascination over the public. Some women wrote to express their depression over his execution, while others claimed to have been damaged by his persuasive charm. As writer Ann Rule, who knew Bundy personally, observed, "Even in death, Ted damaged women. To get well, they must realize that they were conned by the master con man. They are grieving for a shadow man that never existed." But if you thought Bundy's final words were chilling, wait until you hear what another infamous serial killer had to say before facing their own execution. The next case will send shivers down your spine and prove that some last words carry a darkness that never truly fades.
Tonight in News Extra, the man who committed what may be the crime of the century. His name is John Wayne Gacy, convicted of killing 33 innocent people and destroying hundreds of lives. He's never talked to anyone about the case until tonight.
May 10th, 1994, Stateville Correctional Center, Illinois. The nation holds its breath as the infamous killer clown, John Wayne Gacy, is led to the execution chamber. But before the lethal injection is administered, Gacy utters his final words, a chilling reminder of the evil that lived behind his painted smile. John Wayne Gacy's story is one of monstrous duality. By day, he was a respected businessman, active in local politics, known for his volunteer work, especially as Pogo the Clown, entertaining children at parties and charity events. But by night, he was a predator who lured men and boys to his house, where he raped, tortured, and murdered at least 33 victims between 1972 and 1978. Most were buried in the crawl space beneath his suburban Chicago home, while others were dumped in the Des Plaines River. Gacy's arrest shocked the nation. The jovial clown persona, a staple of children's parties and community events, was forever tainted by his horrifying crimes. The discovery of so many bodies beneath his home turned what should have been a symbol of suburban safety into a house of horrors. The killer clown quickly became a media sensation, and his case forever changed how America viewed both clowns and the people living next door. During his 14 years on death row, Gacy maintained his innocence, despite overwhelming evidence and his own detailed confessions. He became notorious for his manipulative behavior, painting macabre artwork, often featuring clowns, and selling it to collectors. He even launched a $1.29 per minute phone line, where he answered questions about his case, further profiting from his infamy. As his execution date approached, Gacy continued to protest his innocence. In his final statement to his lawyer, he claimed that killing him would not compensate for the loss of others, and that the state was simply murdering him. But the truth was undeniable. Gacy was one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. On the day of his execution, Gacy was in a chatty mood. He enjoyed a last meal of fried chicken, shrimp, fries, and strawberries, a final indulgence before facing justice. Then, as the execution team began the procedure, a technical malfunction occurred. The chemicals used in the lethal injection solidified unexpectedly, clogging the IV tube and causing a delay. It was a fittingly macabre twist for a man whose life was filled with dark irony. The execution team replaced the tube, and the process resumed, ultimately taking 18 minutes to complete. But it was Gacy's final words that captured the world's attention. As he was being led to the execution chamber, he looked at the prison official and sneered,
Kiss my ass.
These weren't words of remorse or reflection. They were a final act of defiance from a man who had spent his life manipulating and destroying others. Gacy's last words were a stark reminder of the evil that can hide behind a friendly face. They were the final act of a man who had spent his life playing roles, whether as a businessman, a politician, or a clown. Even in death, he refused to show remorse or accept responsibility for his crimes. Outside the prison, a crowd of over 1,000 gathered. Some wore t-shirts mocking the killer clown, while others protested the death penalty. But for many, Gacy's execution represented justice finally being served for his countless victims and their families. After his death, Gacy's brain was removed for scientific study in the hope of understanding what drove him to commit such atrocities. His ashes were scattered in an undisclosed location, ensuring that his final resting place would never become a shrine for those fascinated by his crimes. The legacy of John Wayne Gacy extends far beyond his victims. His case changed how missing person cases were handled, leading to the creation of the National Amber Alert System. It also fundamentally altered how clowns are perceived in American culture, turning what was once a symbol of innocent fun into a figure of fear and suspicion. But if you thought Gacy's final act of defiance was chilling, wait until you hear the next story, where a serial killer's last words were not of anger, but of shocking revelation.
I'm leaving. I'm glad. Thanks a lot, society, for railroading my.
By the time October 9th, 2002 arrived, the world knew Aileen Wuornos not just as a serial killer, but as a unique anomaly in American criminal history. Her life and final words would become the stuff of legend, forever etched into the dark annals of true crime. Her last statement, delivered with chilling clarity just before her execution by lethal injection, remains one of the most bizarre and haunting in death row history.
Yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back, like Independence Day with Jesus. June 6th, like the movie. Big mothership and all. I'll be back. I'll be back.
But how did this troubled woman, born Aileen Carol Pittman on February 29, 1956, become the infamous Damsel of Death? Her story is a tragic tapestry woven from abuse, abandonment, and a relentless spiral of violence. Wuornos' childhood was a nightmare from the start. Her father, a convicted molester, committed suicide in prison before she ever met him. Her mother abandoned her and her brother when they were just children, leaving them in the care of abusive grandparents. By age 11, Aileen was already trading sexual favors for basic necessities. And by 14, she had become pregnant after being raped by a family friend. Forced to give up her child and kicked out of her home at 15, Wuornos began a life of hitchhiking, prostitution, and petty crime that would eventually lead her to Florida. Between November 30th, 1989 and November 19th, 1990, Wuornos killed 7 men: Richard Mallory, David Spears, Charles Carskadden, Peter Seams, Troy Burris, Charles Humphreys, and Walter Antonio. All were middle-aged white men who picked her up while she was working as a prostitute along Florida highways. Wuornos claimed self-defense in each case, alleging that her victims had raped or attempted to rape her. However, evidence showed a pattern of robbery and murder, with each victim being shot multiple times and their vehicles and possessions stolen. Her arrest on January 9, 1991, at the Last Resort Biker Bar in Volusia County marked the end of her violent spree. The investigation quickly revealed a trail of stolen goods, pawn shop receipts, and witness testimony linking her to the murders. Her partner Tyria Moore, who had been a central figure in Wuornos' life since 1986, cooperated with police to secure a confession in exchange for immunity. The trial that followed was a media spectacle. Wuornos was convicted of multiple counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Despite attempts to introduce evidence of her traumatic past and claims of self-defense, the jury was unconvinced. In total, she received 6 death sentences. Wuornos' time on death row was marked by increasingly erratic behavior and wild accusations against prison staff. She claimed they were poisoning her food, subjecting her to sonic pressure, and plotting to drive her insane. Yet, in her final petition to the Florida Supreme Court, she wrote,
I killed those men, robbed them as cold as ice, and I'd do it again too. There's no chance in keeping me alive or anything, because I'd kill again. I have hate crawling through my system. I am so sick of hearing this "she's crazy" stuff. I've been evaluated so many times. I'm competent, sane, and I'm trying to tell the truth. I'm one who seriously hates human life and would kill again.
Her final days were documented in Nick Broomfield's Aileen, Life and Death of a Serial Killer, where she expressed her anger at being railroaded by society and the system. Wuornos' execution by lethal injection came after she declined a last meal, accepting only a cup of coffee. At 9:47 a.m., she became the second woman executed in Florida and the 10th in the United States since capital punishment was reinstated in 1976. Even in death, Aileen Wuornos' story refused to fade. Her ashes were scattered beneath a tree in Michigan by her childhood friend, Dawn Botkins, and her requested song, Natalie Merchant's Carnival, played at her funeral. Her life and crimes inspired numerous books, documentaries, and the Oscar-winning film Monster. As we move to the next case, consider Aileen Wuornos' final words and what they reveal about the mind of a killer facing her last moments. But the darkness doesn't end here. The next story will take us even deeper into the chilling world of another serial killer's last words and twisted justice. January 16, 1936, Sing Sing Prison. The air was thick with anticipation as Albert Fish, one of America's most notorious serial killers, took his final walk toward the electric chair. At 11:06 p.m., the chamber doors closed behind him, sealing the fate of a man whose crimes had shocked the nation to its core. Fish's last words, uttered with a chilling calm, were simple yet deeply unsettling.
I don't even know why I'm here.
This bizarre statement, coming from a man convicted of unspeakable atrocities, left witnesses stunned and confused. It was a final act of defiance, or perhaps an indication of his complete detachment from reality. Born Hamilton Howard Fish in 1870, his early life was marked by tragedy and instability. His father died when he was just 5 years old, and his mother, unable to care for him, placed him in an orphanage. There, he endured severe physical abuse, an experience that would shape his twisted desires for pain and domination. As Fish grew older, his depravity only deepened. He became a house painter in New York City, but behind this ordinary facade, he committed acts of unimaginable cruelty. Fish targeted the most vulnerable in society, from marginalized backgrounds, whom he believed would not be missed. His crimes spanned decades and involved torture, murder, and cannibalism. One of his most notorious victims was Grace Budd. Fish, posing as a wealthy farmer named Frank Howard, gained the trust of her family and convinced them to let Grace accompany him to a supposed birthday party. She never returned. Years later, Fish would send a gruesome letter to Grace's mother, detailing the horrific details of her daughter's fate. Fish's capture came after years of evading justice. A slip in using stationery from the New York Private Chauffeurs Benevolent Association led investigators to his last known residence. Detective William King patiently waited for Fish to return, finally apprehending him without incident, although Fish did briefly brandish a razor blade before surrendering. During his trial, expert witnesses described Fish as a psychiatric phenomenon, citing his countless abnormalities and sadistic tendencies. Despite the defense's plea of insanity, the jury found him sane and guilty, sentencing him to death. In the days leading up to his execution, Fish penned a final statement, several pages of handwritten notes. His lawyer, James Dempsey, refused to reveal its contents, stating,
It was the most filthy string of obscenities that I have ever read.
As Fish entered the execution chamber, he reportedly helped the executioner position the electrodes on his body. The first jolt of electricity didn't kill him, leading to a persistent rumor that the needles he had inserted into his own body short-circuited the apparatus. However, witnesses later confirmed his death was no different from others executed by the electric chair. Fish's legacy is one of horror and revulsion. He claimed to have children in every state, with victim estimates ranging from 3 confirmed murders to possibly over 100. His case fundamentally changed American society's view of stranger danger and child safety, marking a grim turning point in public awareness of behavior. The man who once called himself the Gray Man left behind a trail of broken lives and shattered innocence. His final words echo as a stark reminder of the depths of human depravity and the necessity of justice, no matter how deranged the criminal may be. But if you think Fish's story was disturbing, wait until you hear about the next killer on our list, whose final words were even more haunting and mysterious.
Almost 100 years ago, a serial killer from East Grand Forks faced the executioner. Carl Panzram was born in 1891 outside what was a small farming community. After being convicted of 5 murders and committing countless other heinous crimes, he was executed at Leavenworth Prison in 1930.
June 1920. Carl Panzram docked his stolen yacht near New York City, ready to prey on unsuspecting sailors. One by one, he hired them aboard, only to murder them with cold, calculated cruelty. This wasn't random violence. It was a chilling spree fueled by pure hatred. Born in 1891 in Minnesota, Panzram's childhood was marked by abuse and neglect. Sent to brutal reform schools where he was beaten and raped, he quickly grew a deep-seated rage against the world. This rage festered as he drifted through countless prisons and jails, each stint only hardening his hatred. By 1920, Panzram was no ordinary criminal. Using stolen money from a robbery at former President William Howard Taft's mansion, he bought a yacht, the Akista. Over the next few months, he lured sailors from New York's port bars onto his vessel. Once aboard, he would get them drunk, assault them, then shoot them with a stolen Colt 45 before dumping their bodies into Long Island Sound. He later claimed to have killed around 10 men this way, but it was likely just a fraction of his true tally. His spree ended when the Akista ran aground near Atlantic City. 2 of his last intended victims escaped, but Panzram kept moving. Arrested for burglary not long after, he bounced between prisons, never showing remorse. In fact, his own words reveal a man who hated humanity itself. While serving time in Leavenworth, a prison foreman named Robert Warnka bullied Panzram relentlessly. On June 20th, 1929, Panzram snapped, beating Warnka to death with an iron bar. He was convicted and sentenced to death. Refusing all appeals, he told those who sought to save him,
I wish you all had one neck and that I had my hands on it.
On the day of his execution, Panzram spat in the executioner's face. When asked if he had any last words, he snarled,
Yes, hurry it up, you Hoosier bastard. I could kill a dozen men while you're screwing around.
His legacy is one of unyielding hatred, a raw glimpse into a man destroyed by a cycle of abuse and cruelty, a man who embraced evil as his only truth. But if you think Panzram's story is the darkest this world has seen, wait until you hear the next one's final words.
This is the mummified head of the vampire of Dusseldorf himself.
July 2nd, 1931, the courtyard of Klingelputz prison in Cologne is silent as Peter Curtin, flanked by a priest and psychiatrist, walks to the guillotine. The man known as the Vampire of Dusseldorf is about to answer for a lifetime of unspeakable horror. But even in these final moments, his mind remains fixed on the grotesque pleasure that fueled his crimes. As Curtin lies down for his execution, he turns to the prison psychiatrist and asks,
Tell me, after my head is chopped off, will I still be able to hear, at least for a moment, the sound of my own blood gushing from the stump of my neck? That would be the pleasure to end all pleasures.
These chilling words reveal the true nature of a man whose entire existence revolved around violence and perversion. Peter Curtin's story began in the poverty and abuse of 1880s Germany. The oldest of 13 children, he endured a childhood of relentless violence at the hands of an alcoholic father who forced his family to witness unspeakable acts. By the age of 9, Curtin claims to have drowned 2 boys, though these deaths were ruled accidental at the time. His teenage years were marked by bestiality, animal, mutilation, and petty crime, all precursors to the unimaginable violence that would follow. Released from prison in 1913, Curtin's twisted desires could no longer be contained. His first known murder was that of Christine Klein, a girl brutally strangled and slashed during a burglary. He returned to the scene the next day, reveling in the horror he had created. This pattern of deriving sexual gratification from violence would define his life. Over the next 16 years, Curtin's crimes escalated in both frequency and brutality. He targeted victims of all ages and genders, though his preferred targets were children and young women. His methods varied, stabbing, but always with the same goal: achieving pleasure through violence. He sometimes drank his victims' blood, earning his infamous nickname. In 1929, Curtin's killing spree reached its peak: 7 murders, countless attempts, and a city gripped by fear. The randomness of his attacks made him impossible to predict. He switched weapons frequently, trying to convince police that multiple killers were at work. Sometimes he let victims go if he achieved orgasm before killing them, a grotesque mercy rooted in his perverse desires. Curtin's arrogance was his undoing. After assaulting Maria Budlick, he let her go. She wrote a letter about the attack, which accidentally ended up in police hands. Realizing the authorities were closing in, Curtin confessed everything to his wife, urging her to collect the reward for his capture. His arrest in May 1930 ended one of Germany's most terrifying crime sprees. In custody, Curtin confessed to 68 crimes, including 9 murders and 31 attempted murders. He showed no remorse, blaming his actions on childhood abuse and prison punishments. At trial, he was kept in a specially built cage to protect him from enraged relatives of his victims. He claimed that recalling his crimes was not at all unpleasant. I rather enjoy it. Psychologists studying Curtin were confronted with a man who embodied pure sadism. Carl Berg's book, The Sadist, became a classic of criminological literature. Experts agreed that Curtin was fully aware of his actions and was responsible for his crimes. His primary motive was always sexual gratification through violence, though he sometimes claimed revenge against society as justification. The jury took only 90 minutes to convict Curtin on 9 counts of murder and 7 of attempted murder. He was sentenced to death by guillotine. In his final days, Curtin requested Wiener Schnitzel, fried potatoes, and white wine for his last meal, then asked for a second helping, which was granted. As the blade fell on July 2, 1931, Curtin achieved his final moment of twisted pleasure. His severed head was later studied by scientists who found no abnormalities. Today, his mummified head sits on display in Wisconsin, a grim reminder of the darkness that can lurk within the human mind. Curtin's legacy endures not just in the horror of his crimes, but in the profound impact he had on the understanding of serial murder and sexual sadism. His case changed European society's perception of such crimes forever. And his final words, those of a man utterly consumed by the pursuit of violent pleasure, remain some of the most chilling ever spoken by a serial killer. The story of Peter Curtin is not just a tale of murder. It's a disturbing exploration of the depths of human depravity, the consequences of unchecked violence, and the enduring question, are monsters born or are they made?